How do you transform your relationship with cancer? Shifting out of that mindset of cancer is the enemy of evil, I have to fight it, and then I've won, and then I move on and I leave it in tatters. It's actually moving beyond that and realizing in order to practice proactive prevention afterwards, I better embrace this cancer because it's around me. It may not be active in me, but I'm living with it from a point of view that I need to be vigilant from now on.
Welcome back to the Integrative Women's Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Drummond, and I am here with my friend and colleague, Kirstin Nussgruber. She is a nutritionist and expert in cancer care. And I want to talk to you, Kirstin, about what brought you to this work. What began, why did you start to specialize in cancer?
Well, thank you, Jessica. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and help serve your audience. It's a good question because how do we all stumble into this area? So I was always interested in nutrition. I grew up in a background where we lived in South Africa. My mother couldn't drive. She, for personal reasons, had issues to overcome and didn't want to learn how to drive, personal fears that she never really confronted. So she went food shopping once a month, and you can imagine that you can't exactly consume a lot of fresh produce then. So I grew up with a lot of canned or tinned vegetables, and I didn't like the taste of it. So I think I developed an interest in learning how to eat healthily pretty early on, really as a teenager. It stayed a hobby for quite some time. I started out on a different career path in human resource management, business school route. And then I got an opportunity when we were living in Germany, in Munich. We were there on an assignment through my husband's work. And I realized, well, I'm fluent in German because I grew up German speaking, that what can I do while I'm here? Because I was surrounded by, from the international school, parents, they were all learning German. And I'm thinking, well, I don't need to do that. I'm fluent. I could study here. And that's kind of when the penny drops, like, all right, why don't you now formalize your hobby? And it was mainly meant more for educational purposes at that point. And I found a naturopathic school in the center of Munich, and they offered a really great in-depth 2-year nutrition course that didn't compare to anything that I had found back in the United States because I was comparing at that stage. And while I was studying, I was diagnosed with my own first breast cancer diagnosis. And then other pennies dropped, and that was then when I realized that's actually who I want to serve once I graduate. First of all, for my own knowledge, for my own path, my own education, and creating my own health plan that way. But also, that kind of helps me really connect with my clientele as well. So I really started focusing on cancer care and just got more and more into that and really have specialized in that area to the degree that's really all I work with and all I want to work with. So in all stages, proactive prevention, going through the cancer journey or the diagnosis and treatment journey, and then of course the beyond treatment phase, the longevity phase. So they're very different categories to approach in the type of support that I can give, nutrition and lifestyle support. And that's just become pretty much a passion of mine. Also watching, I think, concurrently as interest is really picking up. We as women are becoming more and more astute in doing our research and in educating ourselves. Particularly, we were just talking about that, the clientele that you and I attract already, women that are proactive already. That's how they find us in the first place, and that's why they commit to signing up with us and working with us and being coached by us, because they already understand that they need to undertake a degree of responsibility for their own healthcare path forward.
Yeah. So you trained in Germany, then you had your own breast cancer experience. Are you working in the United States now? Do you work globally? What does your practice look like at this point? And then I want to circle back to what we were talking about around some of the more nuances of integrative cancer care.
Sure. So yes, I graduated there, and then we moved back to the United States, and I wanted to affiliate myself with a nutrition organization that has some street credibility. I became board certified in holistic nutrition. We are required to produce continuing education credits. Our board exam is as stringent, if not more, actually, as the board exam of a registered dietitian. Mm-hmm. So, we're doing a lot of legislative work, educating the legislators on what type of qualifications we come with, because, generally nutritionists, that industry is not that very well regulated yet in the United States. Mm-hmm. So I did all of that, and I do have a private practice, but I basically, all my clients come from referrals from various naturopathic oncologists or medical oncologists. So there's that clinical background. So the clients I see are cared for in an integrative way by an integrative clinician. And then I can slot in with the nutrition side and help them implement. So it's really about providing the big picture, but then also helping with the implementation, which, can be very time consuming and challenging, particularly if you're on the cancer treatment phase, if you're going through cancer treatments.
Absolutely. So fatiguing to be then even the basics of meal prep and cooking and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And when you're experiencing the side effects, how do you cope with that? And how do you also allaying a lot of fears, I think. I think very often when my clients get initially diagnosed, there's that fear. I may have caused it with my nutrition choices. And so that's a whole area we go into that renders an in-depth discussion, okay, because it has so many factors to it. And my primary goal is, to get the client to realize you're not to blame for your choices, and to understand, there's a bigger picture to this and all the different layers associated with that, and how we can now change a lot around.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle, because one of the things that I've noticed the longer that I work with clients with complex chronic illness, there's two key things that I'm seeing. One is that it used to be a relatively big needle mover to implement essentially some version of elimination diet, right? Like eliminating certain inflammatory foods, obviously the more processed foods, but even things like dairy and gluten and all of that. And I still think that there's a time and a place for certain types of elimination diets. But I think how we frame it becomes really important, because in the United States in particular, there's a strong emphasis on personal responsibility when it comes to wellness. And I think that's important. I mean, people should and do have some level of power over what they put in their mouth, how they exercise, how they sleep. And I think we have to put it into context that at the end of the day, the food in the United States is simply more toxic. And so you could be eating very well, but our water is more polluted. Our sourcing of fruits and vegetables may not be as clean and maybe more expensive if they are.
That's such a fascinating topic, and it ties into what I was referencing is helping the person understand the bigger picture, and also helping the person connect with your own body. Everyone's unique. The terrain that we present with is as unique as every different piece of soil and every different garden that we have around us, right? So we have to understand, first of all, if we can, use the tools that we have available to us to try and figure out, well, what is my terrain like? What's going on there? What could be influencing the choices that I make, even the healthy choices that I make? Because I have plenty of clients where you touched on the elimination foods and so on. And, we can't necessarily just follow this cookie cutter practice of if you reduce all those foods, you'll feel better. I have
Right.
many cancer clients where almost the opposite is true.
Yes.
It depends, of course, on what stage in their cancer journey they are at, the degree of debilitating side effects from their treatments and any comorbidities that they had and so on. So all of, those individual factors play a role. But, sometimes we have to introduce carbohydrates back, right? Or, not that we ever take them all out completely, but obviously there is definitely a way in which we have to connect with our bodies, listen to our bodies, and just analyze our bodies as a big factor in trying to figure out what is the right nutrition for me. That goes hand in hand with, yes, we are exposed to certain environmental factors that affect our food here in the United States or elsewhere too in the world. But our bodies are also fascinating, right? And when we support them in the right way, going back to understanding where are my imbalances, what do I really need to focus on specifically, and doing that consistently, you can strengthen your body to be able to deal with that. They can cope with that to a degree, but they can cope with that. So that we don't run around feeling just doom and gloom that, oh, we are just totally branded here in the United States and there's no hope for us and we're all going to become so toxic. That's also, again, really going down a rabbit hole that, is not really conducive to mental health either.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think there's a balance to be had between that empowerment of we have the capacity to further optimize our detox pathways, our, gut microbiome, terrain, if you will. Even, I mean, obviously, if someone is in the midst of cancer treatment and dealing with side effects and fatigue, like them to personally start a garden may be a real challenge, but someone in their family may be able to help with that. There may be farmers markets local to them. Like there are sources. And I think that point about terrain can be very empowering because I think one of the things that's been most interesting to me in terms of complex chronic illness, which some of which can predispose clients to cancer, such as endometriosis or post-viral syndromes, these create environments in the body of relative toxic or inflammation or metabolic dysregulation overload that set up the stage for cancer. And we can talk about that in a minute. But there's two sides of the coin. One is trying to get access to the best possible sources of food and health and clean air and water. And two people living in the same home, one could be struggling with mold toxicity type illnesses and one person feels absolutely fine. So it makes a big difference what that personal physiologic terrain and genetic predisposition and history of whether it's viral, pathogen load or toxin load or whatever. So if you have someone who comes to you with cancer, let's say they're in that kind of acute cancer stage, and they are, they've already been drinking filtered water and eating as organic as possible, and they exercised. And where do you start to help improve things on both ends of that spectrum, both in that human's individual body and in their environment and access?
Again, if they are in the middle of cancer treatment, that's your main focus, is just coping, getting through that stage and trying to obviously create an environment that is as supportive as possible. You can't overload your clients at that point because that can lead to severe anxiety, where they just feel, I can't win this battle because I've got all these other things to do as well. So it's a very important focus at that point to just help calm them down. Because this problem with today too is we are overloaded with information at all times from so many different sources, and a lot of it, especially in the nutrition world, is contradictory, conflicting even. So they often come to me totally confused and very revved up, very anxious. So my job there is to help ground them. So we start with pretty much the basics, okay? And so when it comes to nutrition, helping them understand, first of all, how are they eating? Can we start improving on that and explaining if there are certain choices in there that they are making, even if they're healthy choices? We have conversations around how that can contribute possibly to this imbalance or that, and then trying to match it up with lab work results that we have. Maybe we have that already available. I try and get lab work done before any treatment starts if I can catch them at that moment, so that we know what we're dealing with. So, in other words, rooting it in concrete information that we have. Okay. Then let's say we've moved out of the treatment phase, or even if we are in the proactive prevention phase, if someone comes to me and says, look, I've got cancer running in my family and I'm concerned, I'm all right, but what can I do to improve? That I would lump that in the same category. That's when we can really start looking at, we have to look at those, you mentioned the factors like genetic predisposition. What types of SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, mutations do you have? Having them doesn't mean that they are expressed or switched on. So let's evaluate what could potentially cause them to become activated. Having those conversations around all the little steps that are involved. I call it building blocks, building Legos. Okay, so we're going to make a really strong fortress out of you, but we got to start with the foundation. It's about as basic sometimes conversations about where do you get your food from? What do you choose? All right, I only have a supermarket available. I don't have a fresh farmer available, for example. Or I cannot exactly build a vegetable garden. It's what is available to you and how can you optimize what you have, giving people the empowerment that regardless of your circumstances, we can do something about that. We can optimize, we can change, we can say, with each situation, if your budget is such that you cannot only buy organic, let's discuss what you should buy organic. Let's go down that route. As you know, we have options in that sense, the clean 15 and dirty dozen and so on. We can apply strategies basically at every stage and giving the client that sense of empowerment that is so important. I am doing something. I am making a positive change. And teaching them how they can see the changes. And I have noticed in the last 15 years that I've been doing this work is even the smallest changes, if they are consistently applied, they notice it. They notice something positive. That is the biggest motivator, is when they feel something. So my questions in our sessions are often guided as I'm trying to tease that out. If they haven't noticed it themselves, we have conversations for the client to identify on their own, not me telling them, on their own, my bowel movements have improved. I hadn't thought about it, but I'm going every morning now. Before I could only go every second or third day, for example. Or now that you mention it, my left hip doesn't ache as much anymore after my round of exercise. Or I've noticed I've put on weight, and I was like, all right, where? I can't see it though. Well, but you started strength training. You're probably building muscle here. If they don't have access to a composition scale that measures that, right? Many people don't. Little talks like that sometimes are pretty basic, but they are incredibly empowering to give the client the feeling that whatever I'm doing, no matter how small of a change I'm doing, I am creating a change, the change that I want to see. That builds more, because then you get really addicted, you get hungry, you get motivated, inspired, you want more. You realize if those changes that I'm making can yield that, what else could I potentially achieve? I'm not doing that in a too restricted environment. I'm actually doing it. I'm still experiencing joy in life, in food, in eating. That is so important, it's long term. It's a long term sustainable way of living.
Yeah, because of course, long term, you're thinking preventing recurrence, keeping health in general. But also, I think whether you're dealing with cancer or any other complex chronic illness, or short term or acute illness, it usually takes a minimum of months to years to go through the cancer treatment and recovery. And then there may be a recurrence, so we want to mitigate that. But even if that happens, I think one of the things I've learned a lot about in the last few years is really how to keep people more engaged in life, even if they are sick, by whatever that means, because there's a continuum, right? None of us are perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really valuable. I agree. Like the step one of all of our program implementations is exactly the same thing: nervous system regulation,
Yeah.
and joy, and feelings of calm, attentiveness, and not living in fear, which I would imagine is very difficult to do with a cancer diagnosis because it's so well known as, like, with things like endometriosis and post-viral syndromes and autoimmune diseases, it's not really this like specter of death. There's definitely a specter of morbidity, which is significant and sometimes actually harder to explain. Cancer, everyone knows, but everyone's afraid of it. And so how do you help people? What are some of the like clinical pearls you use to help people shift out of that like death mentality, really?
I deal with quite a few stage fours who are my main teachers, I would say. They're incredible, absolutely incredible human beings, because they reach a stage where they accept and surrender, not give up, but they just surrender, and they are incredibly powerful when they are on that stage. First of all, there are so many examples of people, stage 1, 2, 3, thriving. Then it's the feeling of, I can't emphasize this enough, this feeling of empowerment, that we are not just have to be passive victims now of a treatment modality that we know is to a degree controversial, is very toxic, doesn't necessarily guarantee no recurrence. We don't need to feel that we are victims of that. We can very much feel like an active partner participant. And here's how you do that. And then you go through the mechanisms of how can you achieve that you feel you are a partner. Things like, let's say we're focusing on the oncology care. What's, we have conversations around what's your conventional oncology care team like, okay? And if there is any sign of disrespect, laying it out to the client for them to realize this, not for me to tell them, maybe I should actually look around for another team. Okay, somebody who just respects me. I have to respect where they are coming from. We have to respect the limitations of standard of care and the conventional care paradigm. But that doesn't mean that they can't respect how proactive we are. That absolutely can exist. So teaching them tools how to achieve that. Then also clarifying, I think, providing a strategy structure around, well, what can I do to optimize my inner and outer terrain? And that's kind of a phrase, that phrase and another phrase I'll mention just now that I use very often. First of all, how do you optimize your inner and outer terrain? And then how do you transform your relationship with cancer? Right? So that's the title of my book as well, is transforming your relationship with cancer, because we can't, shifting out of that mindset of cancer is the enemy evil, I have to fight it, and then I've won, and then I move on and I leave it in tatters. It's actually moving beyond that and realizing, in order to practice proactive prevention afterwards, okay, I better embrace this cancer, because it's around me. It may not be active in me, but I'm living with it from a point of view that I need to be vigilant from now on, because there again is this divergent from, when you diverge from conventional oncology care into integrative oncology care, once treatment is over and, that's it, you kind of are released. And then the only other kind of marker you have is very often the 5-year mark, and then you're cured, and that's way too limiting. So the integrative oncology care is a lot more proactive, a lot more, you are a lot more engaged and need to be a lot more disciplined. So, there's extensive blood work you can do to look for potential microscopic activity that you could then track. There is so much, so many things that you can do in a structured way where you can keep an eye on things a lot more closely than what conventional care offers you at the moment. Just that alone is very empowering, might be very overwhelming. So you have to be cognizant of the type of personality that's sitting opposite of you, even on a screen, or what's their nervous system health like, what's their stress levels like, what are their stress management techniques. Those areas, to me, in my nutrition counseling is part and parcel of everything. Is how do we deal with that? Because if you have a nervous Nelly versus someone who can just take all kinds of blows, you have to approach them differently. It doesn't mean that a nervous Nelly will remain a nervous Nelly. It's a bit more of a challenge, or it takes a bit longer, because you really want the individual out of their own accord to get there and have that aha moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which then I consider myself having been successful. If I can guide such a personality to the point where they themselves realize, I need to change that. I overreact. I go down this path. Why? Why am I doing that to myself? When they get to that point and are able to work on that, and just coming to terms with the fact that working on your health is a lifelong mission, and you will constantly find challenges. You're never ever going to get to a point where you're over the hump.
Right.
You might be cancer free, but there are a lot of other things. And I can give you examples if you want to hear about from my own health, because I'm now, this year, I'm 12 years out of my second breast cancer diagnosis, right? So 12 years past, double mastectomy, a second round of chemotherapy, 7 weeks of radiation therapy, round 2 of targeted antibody therapy, which is each a year long, so a total of 2 years. What's your life like, right? Doing all the things that you do, the monitoring that I'm doing all the time. But now, you've been in menopause for 12 years, slap bang being thrown into it, early 40s, right?
Yeah.
Now you notice it. Suddenly you're in your 50s, you've been in menopause for so long, and there's lots of things happening with your body that you now need to focus on, so that you can age gracefully and embrace this longevity. And I'm not thinking of cancer in that moment. I'm just thinking of, I want to remain strong and active and physically fit and, not dry up as a prune, that kind of thoughts going. My heart health was affected by treatment. I had to focus on the heart health, because cardiovascular health in women is so very important. So again, I know what to look out for, becoming cognizant of when you get messages from your body and understanding what those messages could potentially be. So that's another whole chapter that you can focus on dealing with your clients, helping them identify that and just embracing the reality of it. That's what your life is like. Things will pop up, and then you will deal with them.
It's so true. I think what you're saying is there's this combination of teaching our clients to begin to notice the things that maybe they had ignored. I'm sweating more, I'm more fatigued. Why is that? What could have changed moving to Houston? It was funny, we just put a sauna in our backyard here in Connecticut, and we lived in Houston for 10 years ish, off and on. And one of our friends from down there posted, when I posted a picture of that sauna, she was like, "Oh, my husband's originally, his hometown is really Houston, Texas." And she's like, "Now Mark can feel at home by just walking into the sauna in the backyard."
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think there's the balance of two things. One is being able to sense the physical sensations when things are different without being hyper vigilant to the point of that kind of chronic anxiety, right? And then the second part is looking at more nuanced markers around things like metabolic health and immune health, what are some of the things that you actually like to track over time, whether it's through wearable devices or lab testing? What are some of those things that are really valuable to give that kind of annual, just stay on top of it perspective?
The cancer train lab work that I do with LabCorp, they draw 19 vials of blood.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's very extensive. There is the whole diabetic panel in detail, watching my glucose insulin metabolism. In my instance, noticing how we had an episode, a tragic episode with one of our dogs that affected me in a different way, in a much more substantial way than what I would have expected it to.
Mm-hmm.
That had an influence on my cortisol levels, had an influence on my hemoglobin A1C, my 3 month basically average glucose metabolism, which was a wow moment for me because the results come back and you go, okay, I haven't really changed what I eat and so on, and then realizing, elevated stress hormones has a direct effect on your glucose metabolism. Going, oh, really? Could that have been? But I thought I was coping pretty well. Those conversations, right? So the diabetic panel, obviously a detailed cardiovascular panel looking at not just total cholesterol, but everything around it. And side note, once you've been in menopause for so long, guess what? Your total cholesterol will probably be elevated and LDL will probably be elevated. And it's got nothing to do with how you're eating. So there are other factors around it. Inflammation markers, a whole host of inflammation markers. Where are you at there? Then we look at, there are cancer biomarkers you can look at just to see, is there a trend? Certain cancer biomarkers related to certain types of cancer. So we look at those.
Things like CA-125, is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. CA-15-3, yeah, exactly. So give an example. So my CA-15-3, ever since I started tracking it, has always been flagged high. So it's like always just kind of just a little high. But that seems to be my norm. Okay. So what I don't want to see is an upward trend over time.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So that's another thing is, when you get results back and something is elevated, don't have an immediate panic attack, but understand what could potentially feed into it. And then depending on what the marker is, you either test again in 3 months or 6 months or even just a year and see if there's an upward trend or not. Okay.
Well, and I think that's what's so valuable about tracking over time consistently, like having people work with you for years, even if they don't see you all the time, just have those checkups, if you will. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I have a spreadsheet, where all that information is in so that it's easy visible. If I ever go and see a different doctor, it's so easy. You just go, here's my stuff. And in one instance, they can see a trend or not a trend. And I've had those things happen where, a test comes back and you go, oh, well, that's a bit elevated here. And then I had it recently where one vial must have gone off. But I had values there that were like shooting through the roof. And it was like, okay, let's just, we run those again, like, a month later, right? Because that can't really be, okay? Right. It was exactly that. So they came back into the range they are more or less normally at. I look at my thyroid health, hormone health. I do look at bone health. Understanding bone health as well, what's going on there in terms of how do I ensure that certain parts like my heart health, like my bone health are optimized again. Okay. And despite the food choices that you take, I am on a very rigorous supplement program that I supervised and so on, is adjusted and so on, but it is that concentrated nutrition is part and parcel of my life. So that teaching clients, if I can summarize, teaching clients that it's never just one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's important for people to be aware that, as you said, if you have a relatively younger cancer diagnosis and treatment and experience, and in your case, it happened twice in your relatively younger years, there are other things that can happen. Hormonal shifts do cause, low estrogen does cause musculoskeletal pain, which is a really many people aren't aware of that. And, physical therapy and fitness training for strengthening the area, doing more bone building, maybe building a little extra, because we know for older women, one of the bigger risks is actually being not heavy enough, ideally with muscle more than fat. But, for kind of building your older woman resilience, it's more about gaining muscle weight, which is
Yes.
challenging to do when you're in a low estrogen, low
Yeah.
testosterone situation. One quick question I had on your protocol or your lab testing: do you look at fasting insulin and oral glucose tolerance, or an insulin that's challenged, or how do you look at insulin, because metabolic issues are so much related to cancer?
I just LabCorp just do fasting glucose, fasting insulin, and then hemoglobin A1C. Sometimes the estimated average glucose,
Mm-hmm.
if need be. So at this point, if it depends, of course, if there are issues, and sometimes we have clients whose A1C is just rising, and yet it's not nutritionally related, and it's also not necessarily cortisol related. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the more complex cases when you then start looking into what else could be metabolically going on here that is revving that up. But yes, insulin-like growth factor is another, hormone we look at too,
Mm-hmm.
because that can also be regulated by dietary choices initially, right? If that's the kind of first step that you try. So the metabolic health depends on how the client comes to you, right? Have they
Mm-hmm.
had issues with that before? If yes, then of course that becomes one hot topic area that we focus on education wise as well, but also from a regulatory point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have to do very targeted supplements. Berberine helps a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we do need to go to metformin, maybe just for a period, okay? But it depends. I mean, as you know, other factors could be playing into that, other dysregulations in the body. So we have to understand what else could be fueling it or is behind it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is so valuable. I think, that whole idea of, first of all, having some resources of how to find and collaborate with integrative oncologists is so important. And then how you really work with clients in a very personalized approach, starting with an extensive panel that just gives us things to track in addition to being mindful of those messages that people get from their own bodies. I so appreciate it. And we didn't really have time to dig too much into this, but one of the things I love most about your work is that real focus on joyful, beautiful, delicious cooking, not this sense of restriction. And,
Yeah.
because I completely agree with you that bringing the joy in the midst of this challenge and bringing the deliciousness and the beauty and making food wanting to be eaten, because especially for people in the midst of acute cancer, just keeping weight on can be a real challenge.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I love all of your cooking stuff. So, is there any last things you would like to share, or where people can find you if they'd like to work more with you?
My website, it's my first name, kirstinscancercare.com. So my first name and then an S. So kirstinscancercare.com. And I offer a 15-minute assessment call that can be booked there. You can have access, purchase my book there. And, the blog has a couple of things, got recipes there too. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the main source, or, Facebook or Instagram can find me, and LinkedIn. Those are my kind of the main places that you can find me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing this perspective and those really powerful clinical pearls, and just your in depth experience with this population, starting with your own experience, which is such an important driver for the meaningfulness of the work that you do. So, thank you for being here, and I hope we can get together again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to be on your podcast. So Stay healthy and keep on doing all the fantastic work that you're doing. We're all benefiting from it.
Thanks so much. You too.